On March 24, 2026, the President of the Philippines stood in front of his nation and declared a state of national energy emergency. Not a warning, not a concern, an emergency. The Philippines imports 98% of its oil from the Middle East. When the Strait of Hormuz closed, it endangered the country's entire energy supply. Diesel prices had nearly doubled in 30 days. Airlines were grounding flights. The government had told its citizens, "We have enough crude oil until June 30th. After that, nobody knew. The Philippines became the first country in the world to declare a state of national energy emergency. It would not be the last. This is the story of a 21-mile stretch of water that holds the entire global economy hostage. A choke point so critical that when it closed, 150 oil tankers parked outside it and waited. Brent crude crossed $126 a barrel. The IEA launched the largest emergency oil release in human history. And analysts at Columbia University warned there is no policy tool on Earth that can prevent $200 a barrel oil if it stays shut. The Philippines saw it first. The rest of the world is right behind them.
To understand how a single strait can break the world, you need to understand how completely the world built itself around it. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Its two unidirectional sea lanes handle around 20 million barrels of oil per day, roughly 20% of global seaborne oil trade. That's more oil than the United States produces domestically, every single day. Run the numbers. The world consumes approximately 105 million barrels of oil per day. 1 in 5 of those barrels passes through a corridor barely wider than Manhattan is long. Japan relies on the strait for 70% of its oil imports. South Korea, India, the Philippines, Thailand all depend on imports for 60 to 95% of their crude supply. China gets a third of its oil through that same choke point. Europe gets 12 to 14% of its LNG from Qatar alone, through the strait. And it's not just oil. The Gulf region produces nearly half of the world's urea and 30% of its ammonia. About 1/3 of all internationally traded fertilizer passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That fertilizer feeds the world's crops. Those crops feed the world's people. For decades, every government, every oil company, every airline, and every shipping conglomerate on Earth made the same quiet assumption: the strait stays open. It was the single most consequential assumption in the global economy, and nobody stress-tested it seriously because nobody thought they had to. The disruption has echoed the 1970s energy crisis through acute supply shortages, currency volatility, inflation, and heightened risks of stagflation and recession. But unlike the 1970s, this time the world was more interconnected, more dependent, more fragile. The warning signs were always there. What was missing was the spark.
On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran. Operation Epic Fury targeted military facilities, nuclear sites, and leadership, resulting in the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. From a military strategy standpoint, the logic was clean. Iran had been escalating for months. Nuclear negotiations in Geneva had collapsed. Iran had already conducted a partial closure of the strait as a warning shot earlier in the month. The intelligence case for acting had been building since 2025. What the planners modeled for was the military response. What they didn't fully price in was the economic one. Iran responded with missile barrages on Israeli cities and U.S. bases in the Gulf, including in the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued warnings prohibiting vessel passage through the strait. On March 2nd, a senior IRGC commander declared the Strait of Hormuz closed and warned that any vessel attempting transit would be targeted. Within hours, the insurance mathematics made the decision for every shipping company in the world. War risk ship insurance premiums had already jumped from 0.125% to between 0.2% and 0.4% of ship value per transit. For a very large oil tanker, that's an increase of $250,000 per trip. The market didn't wait for a missile to make its call. 150 ships anchored outside the strait and did nothing. The world's most important artery had a tourniquet on it, and nobody had a plan for what happened next. March 1st, tanker traffic through the strait falls by 70%. Brent crude climbs 10 to 13% in a single day. Roughly 20% of the global oil supply normally passes through the approximately 100-mile-long waterway bordering Iran. Some oil is rerouted through pipelines, but they can only carry so much. March 3rd, Trump announces the U.S. Navy will escort tankers through the strait as soon as possible. Iran simultaneously announces it will allow only Chinese vessels to pass, citing China's supportive stance. A bulk carrier broadcasts China owner on its transponder and sails through unmolested. The global shipping industry watches. The message is clear. The strait isn't just closed, it's been weaponized. March 8th, Brent crude surpasses $100 a barrel for the first time in 4 years, rising to $126 at its peak. That single price crossing matters. At $100 oil, economists start modeling recessions. At $126, they stop modeling and start warning. March 11th, the IEA coordinates the release of 400 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves, the biggest release on record. 32 countries vote for it unanimously. The U.S. authorizes 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve alone. Here is where the math gets brutal. The world consumes 105 million barrels of oil per day. At that rate, 140 million barrels covers just 4 days of global consumption. Even compared with normal Hormuz traffic of 20 million barrels per day, the released oil equals only 20 days of flow. An energy strategist put it plainly, this is a small bandage on a large wound. March 15th, Iranian strikes damage between 30 and 40% of Gulf oil refining capacity, removing an estimated 11 million barrels a day from global supply. This is no longer a choke point problem, it's a production problem stacked on top of a shipping problem. March 19th, the United States Armed Forces begin a military campaign to open the strait. As of that week, Iran has made 21 confirmed attacks on merchant ships. March 24th, the Philippines declares its national energy emergency. Diesel prices have nearly doubled. The government announces rationing discussions. President Marcos says nothing is off the table, including grounding every commercial flight in the country. The canary had stopped singing.
The dominoes started falling faster than anyone could count. South Koreans were advised to take shorter showers and charge their phones during the day to conserve electricity. Japan announced its biggest ever release of emergency oil reserves while telling citizens there was no need to hoard toilet paper, a statement that caused more panic buying than it prevented. In India, the world's most populous country, people queued for gas across cities. Mumbai hotels and restaurants shut down fully or partially due to a lack of cooking gas. In Gujarat state, the gas shortage caused the ceramics industry to shut down entirely. Sri Lanka reintroduced fuel rationing. Private motorists were limited to 15 liters of petrol per week, motorcyclists to 5 liters. Sri Lanka had been through a near collapse 4 years earlier. The memory was fresh. Nepal began refilling gas cylinders at only half capacity to lengthen stockpiles. Nepal, a landlocked country, has no reserves, no alternative routes, and no leverage. In Europe, the numbers were clinical, but no less devastating. The EU estimated gas prices had risen 70% and oil by 50%, resulting in an extra €13 billion bill on fossil fuel imports.
Germany and Italy were warned they could slip into technical recession by year-end. The ECB issued a formal stagflation warning, the combination of inflation and stagnating growth that central banks have no clean tool to fight. BASF, Germany's chemical giant, announced it would raise prices on many goods by up to 30%. BASF doesn't make luxury products. It makes the chemicals inside medicines, fertilizers, adhesives, and plastics. A 30% increase from BASF touches virtually every manufactured product on Earth. Before the conflict, the global airline industry had forecast record profits of $41 billion for 2026. With jet fuel prices more than doubling, Korean Air shifted to emergency management mode. Vietnam Air cut flights by 10 to 20%. Vietjet targeted 18% cuts. Bamboo Air aimed for 50%. The United Air CEO warned fares could rise 20% if high jet fuel prices persisted. And the fertilizer crisis, the one nobody was talking about, may be the longest-lasting wound of all. Urea prices increased 50% since the start of the war. The LNG disruption impacted fertilizer production during the spring planting season in the Northern Hemisphere. The potential shortfall could reduce corn yields in the United States, the main feedstock for U.S. beef, poultry, and dairy, and push global food prices higher into 2027. The oil crisis was not going to stay an oil crisis. It was becoming a food crisis, a manufacturing crisis, and a debt crisis, all at once. So that is the story of the Strait of Hormuz, a 21-mile corridor that the entire modern world was built around, then forgot to protect. Oil executives and analysts delivered the same message over and over in the weeks after the closure. The entire world hasn't yet grasped the severity of the situation. They were right. Most people saw gas prices rise and assumed it was temporary. They didn't see the fertilizer shortage coming for their grocery bills in 2027. They didn't see the plastics shortage hitting appliance factories in 6 months. They didn't see that the IEA's 400 million barrel release, the largest in history, only covered 4 days of what the strait normally moves. 3 lessons, the kind that cost trillions to learn. 1. Just-in-time is a bet, not a system. The global economy optimized for efficiency and called it resilience. Nations held 30 to 60 days of fuel reserves because holding more was expensive. Japan had roughly 90 days. The Philippines had until June 30th. When the assumption broke, there was no buffer, only a countdown clock. Every country that bragged about lean supply chains just discovered what lean actually means when the pipeline runs dry. 2. Energy dependency is foreign policy. Iran's closure of the strait constitutes a violation of international law, but international law has no enforcement mechanism when the enforcer is already at war. The countries that held political leverage during this crisis, China, Thailand, Muslim-majority nations, negotiated passage. Everyone else anchored and waited. Energy dependency is not an economic variable. It is a national security exposure that takes decades to build and cannot be fixed in a crisis. 3. The price of oil is the price of everything. Fertilizer, plastics, jet fuel, shipping, diesel for tractors, gas for cooking. Most people think of oil as what goes in their car. In reality, petroleum underpins the price of almost every physical good that exists. When $40 of geopolitical risk is added to every barrel, it doesn't stay at the pump. It moves through factories, farms, freight networks, and grocery shelves, and it arrives at your kitchen table 12 months later. The Philippines declared an emergency on March 24, 2026. They had oil until June 30th, 2 months. The question every other country was quietly asking, how long do we have? In 1973, the Arab oil embargo lasted 5 months and triggered a decade of stagflation. The Hormuz Strait has never been fully closed, until now. the world didn't know what it was betting on when it built itself around a 21-mile channel. Now it does.